Hi, I'm Philip Bumpa from APEC Virtual Selling, where we help companies sell more SaaS by leveraging modern virtual selling strategies. In this video, we're going to discuss a very interesting question, which is how much cultural knowledge you actually need to start selling SaaS in a new market. This came about for me recently when discussing an opportunity of expanding into one of the Asian markets. And how I answered this question was, I said that certainly knowing as much as possible about the culture of a market you're trying to expand into will be extremely beneficial. However, this should not stop trying to sell into that market if you have an opportunity to do so at the moment. Also, one thing to keep in mind is that you will always be a foreign seller to these prospects in that market. And I will explain a bit later in the video what that exactly means. So as I mentioned, knowledge is power, right? So knowing things about the culture and buyers in those different countries will certainly be beneficial. And there's many examples here from the Asia Pacific region. So for instance, based on my experience, and what I discussed with others as well, for instance, buyers in China, and especially when we're talking about some smaller companies, it is quite relative in terms of titles. So for instance, it's oftentimes not very clear at all who does what in the organization, and that can be quite flexible. It's not uncommon for somebody to have multiple business cards, depending on what kind of meeting they head into. Also, you cannot really typically map out the organization so well with things like LinkedIn, etc. So you'll definitely be a lot more confused. Also, you might think that the person who actually has a title that they are a decision maker or have the power, have budget control, that isn't really the case at all. So knowing that cultural aspect of selling into mainland China can save you a lot of frustrations, a lot of headaches, can help you qualify as well, so can help you structure your qualification process. Or for instance, in Singapore, because it's a relatively small market, what we find is that buyers typically in the SaaS market, they tend to talk to each other, they tend to be really informed about the offering and the pricing. So if you are presented with something like that in the sales cycle, you shouldn't feel threatened or confused, or you should be equipped how to deal with that, right? Or a third example, let's say if you are selling in Australia, typically the buyers in the Australian market can react very negatively to some more aggressive pressure type sales and closing techniques that might work very well in other countries. So again, knowing as much as possible about the culture and the buyers of the places you will sell into or you're planning to expand to is of course always very beneficial. So as these examples illustrate, of course, knowledge is power. However, acquiring this knowledge should not stop you from trying to expand into a new market if there's a good opportunity to do so. And keep in mind that you will learn a lot of this on the job, so to speak, so in your engagements. Also, if you are leveraging partners in those regions, they might provide valuable insight or assist you initially where you think perhaps a lack of a good understanding or lack of experience in selling in a particular new market could be stressful to you and your team. It's important to keep in mind that to those buyers in the foreign countries that you'll be selling into, that you will always be a foreign seller to them, right? So why do I mention that, and what does that mean? So when I did a lot of work in mainland China, I saw quite a few times that some of the companies that were trying to make business there, they were stressing so much about very, very little cultural things in terms of dealing with their buyers in China, their partners in China, that they came across as trying to be more Chinese than the Chinese people. And I've gotten some very interesting feedback from Chinese colleagues on that, right? So they were losing a lot of time. They were stressing about this, and the buyers in China, those companies, they told me at the end of the day, we recognize that they are foreign, and we're dealing with them because it's mutually beneficial, right? So again, keep in mind that knowing as much as possible will be beneficial to you, but keep in mind that again, you'll always be a foreign seller, right? So don't using this example, for instance, if you're dealing with China, don't try to be more Chinese than the people in China, right? What these contacts in China told me, which I think is a very, very funny yet adequate example, is they said, it would be like the equivalent of wanting to deal with and do business with a company that is headquartered in Dallas, and somebody who spent all their life in mainland China, learned English there, trying to suddenly speak with a southern US accent, so that it is more culturally appropriate, perhaps, as they see it, right? So keep that in mind. Also think about, again, that you will be a foreign seller to them, and think about any bias that there might be, right? So think about potential negative bias depending on where you're selling from, how to mitigate that. But think about the positive bias as well, right? So for instance, if you're selling out of the US, in a lot of markets, depending on your product and your space, but you could use the positive bias that you are seeing in that space as a bit more on the innovative side. You can use that to open a lot of doors and progress a lot of opportunities. I hope you found these insights useful. Working with different markets, different cultures is something that I personally am very passionate about. Having worked in multiple countries, having lived in multiple countries on a couple of continents. If you need help with expanding internationally, definitely get in touch with us. And if you've enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe to our channel and give us some interaction, so that we can get some feedback that this is useful and are motivated to create more of this content.